Okay, so I'm recording. Cool. So, hello everybody. Welcome to an impromptu TST meeting. And just really quickly, I'll let you in detail introduction, sort of, but the primary topic for this is to discuss treatment and tracking of dual tag hosts.
Yes.
Elaborate on that.
Yeah. So one of the use cases of ONOS is in what we call residential court, where um, there's equipment that is of course managed by ONOS, which is a leaf spine fabric, um, and to this fabric we attach access equipment. Specifically in the residential court case, this access equipment are OLT devices, and typically these devices spit out frames that have double VLAN tags. Um, and in the past, what we have been doing is that the fabric doesn't actually even look at the two VLANs. It really just passes, it looks at the outer VLAN and passes it through to a compute node, which is the one that actually processes the two VLANs and pops them off and routes the traffic after processing it. And on the reverse direction, it's the same piece of software that pushes those double VLAN tags and sends it through back to the OLT. So all processing is done in this container, this what we used to call VSG. Actually, we still call it VSG, but in the new use case, we want to look at a variation of this, where the subscriber traffic never has to leave the hardware and can just go from the OLT through the fabric out to the internet. So so think of this as a fast path through the hardware. Now, what happens as a result of this work is that the fabric is the one that has to deal with the double VLAN tags, pop them off in one direction, push them back on in another direction. And in the process of doing that, some traffic, like say ARP traffic from the subscriber, will go to ONOS double tagged. And this is how ONOS recognizes attached equipment and attached hosts, as we call them. But host is just a generic term. It can stand for anything that is attached to the fabric. So in this particular case, it would be the subscriber's sort of remote gateway that is in the subscriber's home. So what that means is you're going to now have to recognize hosts in ONOS based not just on MAC and VLAN, which is what we do today, but MAC and double VLAN. And that outer VLAN can have two different ETH types. It can be 8100, which is the standard VLAN ETH type. It can also be 88A8, which is a standard proposed tag protocol ID, so to speak. So recognizing hosts, so the issue that we want to bring to the TST is that what do we do with the host store today, which is keyed on the MAC VLAN? Given that there'll be hosts now that will be recognized on double tags, where even the outer tag could have two different tag protocol IDs.
So I guess the interesting question is a MAC address globally unique, or is a MAC address an identifier that is unique within a VLAN? It sounds like in your use case, MACs are globally unique, and I think in a lot of networking use cases, MACs tend to be globally unique, especially when the MAC global ID flag is set. But there are cases where potentially you could be using like local MACs, and if you're using a local MAC, then perhaps two MACs in different VLANs are in fact different hosts, especially in a virtual network.
Yeah, especially when you consider virtualization, and in principle, VLANs is virtualization of the LAN.
Yeah.
So the only requirement is that MAC is unique within a VLAN. And I don't think we should go away from that because a lot of our other software depends on that, having the MAC be unique only within the VLAN.
In fact, I think the key in the host store is a MAC VLAN pair.
It is.
So that makes sense.
And even if we can make that assumption that we have globally unique VLAN, we still need to keep that information in the host store. The reason is that we need to create that IP to double VLAN tag mapping when we send the packet to the downstream. We need that information to put those two tags back for that host.
Right. So
when the packet going upstream, we pop these two tags and then send it to the upstream, right? But when it comes back, it's raw IP packet without any tag.
Correct. I mean,
But when you reach the final leaf switch, we need to push these two tags back to that packet
in the correct order.
And the only thing we can associate with what tag we need to push to this packet is from the IP address, right? And so such that we need some kind of association between the IP address and the two tags, right? And since we already remember IP address in a host store, we're thinking, why don't we just extend the host store to keep track on one more information, which is the additional VLAN tag.
Mm-hmm.
So the question then becomes is, do we change the key of the host store to be able to accept a second VLAN and recognize a MAC address with two VLANs, where the second VLAN can be optional? Or do we take the second VLAN information and put that into the value, the data, right? We still recognize with MAC VLAN, but the second VLAN is stored as metadata sort of with that association. And I don't have any good feelings either way. I mean, does anyone else have an opinion?
So at least look, so I guess right now we're talking about when we say host store, we're talking about from host service really, right? Because
Correct.
that's the facade used by others. So we currently have a number of query methods. One of them, a specific one to the IP address, is get host by IP, and then it's going to get a set of hosts by that specified IP address. So I assume that then within the host, the descriptor itself would be the knowledge of whether this thing is tool tagged or not, wouldn't it?
Mm.
Is that something that just needs to be bound to the host itself, right? Because given an IP address, we can already look a set of hosts up. There can already be multiple, right?
Right.
Well, but the thing is that if you don't put it in a key, then essentially we're not able to allow same MAC address but different VLAN tags. Right? The key will overlap and it will override the previous one. So I think Brian's question is still valid. Like, do we kind of assume that MAC can be globally unique?
Well, so the two tags, the nature of the tags, one's the customer tunnel and one's the aggregation tunnel.
Subscriber or service tunnel.
Yeah. And does it make sense to associate it's the pair that's globally unique, right?
Which pair?
It's the combination of those two addresses
Yes.
that make it globally.
Yes, that's right.
Customer tunnel IDs.
Are they globally unique or unique to an OLT?
They are unique to an OLT. So you can take the same C tag. Am I saying this right? So in a PON, the C tag has to be unique, and then across PONs, the C tag could be the same, but they will use different S tags. So it's the pair of C and S that makes it unique.
So multiple
I didn't know if S was going to be replicated at all. Okay, thanks.
So multiple customers share an S tag,
Yes.
and the same C tag can be used across multiple access devices. Where like the
Yeah, I think
access
about
edge
it's like
side.
hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
So the set of information that revolves around the host, right, is identified by the notion of host ID.
Mm-hmm.
Host ID is basically just an extension of an element.
So we may have one situation with an SP where the C tag may not be unique, so we may want to clarify.
Yeah, that's also true. There is also a possibility that even within a pawn, sometimes we have no control over what C tag can be used, and multiple subscribers in the same pawn might end up using the same C tag. And I guess off the top of my head, I can't remember how we distinguish between the two of them, but I've forgotten that discussion. Or the details of that discussion. But if you cannot control what the C tag is, then you would have to rely on the MAC address only.
Is the MAC
to
address,
identify uniqueness.
Is
Right?
the MAC address visible in the pawn network?
Yeah.
Is it?
No, once it comes out.
Comes up. Okay. No, but going back, how does the OLT know which port it need to go out?
And yeah, so you can look at MAC address as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess what it comes down to is if a host ID can be created that will make a host globally unique across the ONOS domain, then I don't think we need to change the key. If there is going to be a conflict where you have the potential for some collision because you can't put together a single VLAN ID plus MAC address to create a key, then the key should be augmented. My gut feeling is that you're probably using globally unique MAC addresses anyway, so maybe the second VLAN tag could just be metadata as part of the host object.
So one
But
thing
I don't know enough about how
well,
the
So today the VLAN is embedded inside the host ID.
correct.
Yes.
It's MAC and VLAN.
Yes.
So what about creating an essentially auxiliary form of the host ID constructor where basically you can construct it with two tags?
Maybe the thing is that maybe we don't have to touch the key at all, right? The thing is that when we read when ONOS put a tag packet into the receive a tag packet and put it into the host store, you look at the outer tag.
Okay, then
So
that's enough to
the
differentiate
MAC
globally.
VLAN combination in a host store key, the tag is actually the S tag.
Okay, the outer one.
Can we assume that
Okay.
inside the same S tag, the MAC are globally unique? Because we cannot. Because if we don't have this assumption, then the case where the C tag are overlapping, we cannot distinguish them. Right? If the C tag and MAC is both the same, then there's no way to distinguish them, even in the OLT level. Right. So if we can make assumption that at least the MAC address is unique inside the same S tag domain, then we're safe, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to change the key.
So in that case, we wouldn't have to change the key, but we could probably add something like an inner tag into the.
We just need a
into
attribute, right?
On the host. On host.
Oh,
Just on the host implementation. The attribute would just be on default host.
so you're talking about
put,
the attribute, or you're talking
attri-
about actually a specific field?
Isn't
we
that
have-
the-
remember we have-
a field on the object.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that's what I was going to suggest. I
And
generally
that-
prefer to stay away from attributes. Those should be really for truly sparse things. Okay, so you're talking about field on the object. Then that's what I was
Yeah.
talking about.
You mean
Basically,
annotations?
No,
annotations.
I'm not talking about annotation.
Okay.
I'm more talking about
So you're talking about an attribute
Brian.
then on
on object, then the value of the store, right? The key is the MAC VLAN, and the value is the default host.
Correct.
Right, so
Value
the
is
value-
effectively
yeah,
default
some-
host, the
yeah.
default host, or the host.
We
being
put a
the
field
interface
in
with
there
that.
called inner VLAN or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Inner VLAN. Yeah. And then if it's sufficient to distinguish it by the other one, that would be great, because that would
And
that would
maybe that
minimize
could
the
be
changes.
optional, and then by default that would just be null in other case.
Where,
So
where this gets foiled is if, for example, like if the CPUs that you distributed to all your customers had the same MAC address, like the software just used the same MAC address or something for all CPUs, then you would require the customer VLAN as part of the key to differentiate between two hosts. But if there's nothing like that going on, then it would seem sufficient to just embed that information in the object. I guess the question comes, what happens when a host gets registered, same MAC address, same outer VLAN, different inner tag? Is that an error? Should you update it? Is it possible for it to be present on two different inner VLANs? Is it possible for a host MAC pair to be present on two connections?
I quite frankly don't know, but seems like you don't ship out RGs which have different serial numbers and same MAC address.
It would be very weird.
Yeah, it would be strange.
Yeah, I mean, I just bought an RG actually the other day from Best Buy, and serial number, MAC address were clearly specified. And anyway, I don't know.
There was a bug, I think, I don't know if it was open source software or someone. I remember a while ago there was a bug where someone just had like the same MAC address on like every. It was probably some open source like DDWRT or something. But anyway, the one is like, it's a potential security vulnerability area as well. If you're using those tags as like a way to state that this is the authoritative location, and then someone could just spoof the same MAC address, like your neighbor could spoof your MAC address and somehow get access to your content or something. But
so then why not? I mean, how much work is it to change the key to have all three things?
Right.
We're talking much more work. Is that?
I think it's much more work.
I mean, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
So the identifier is underneath ultimately just a string. So today we have a way of parsing the host ID simply as the MAC address VLAN, but we could also make it so that we recognize a secondary form, because we would want to maintain that, right, for backwards compatibility. But we might want to have an augmented form or secondary form, which would have basically MAC address inner and outer tag, right? And that way, you would find that MAC address. You will find that entity only by using the full IT, not just by the MAC address and stuff. For the other forms, you would have to have a query method.
So Bob has some feedback comments on chat.
Go ahead, Charles. What were you saying?
I was saying,
You need to change all the
not everything is. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, mininet hosts often reuse the same MAC addresses. So if you have people, I see people like create two like mininet networks reusing the same MAC addresses and like bridge them together, or you can't actually bridge them together, but you can route them together if you care about it. So for example, if they have different IP addresses, often you can get IP connectivity even if you reuse the MAC addresses. Now that might break ONOS, but it's really easy to reuse the same MAC addresses using Mininet because it creates them in a canonical way. And also you can have attachment to the IP layer. Once again, I don't know if ONOS supports this, but I think things like maybe not PPP itself, but things like it where you're connecting with a link layer that's not Ethernet, like serial IP or something. You might end up reusing the same so-called MAC address. Now, I realize this is not an Ethernet application, but certainly it seems not unreasonable to imagine different segments of your network that don't have the same, or that reuse the same MAC addresses. And I think also in OpenFlow, you could just easily, I mean, you sort of know the attachment port. So even in an L2 domain, you could potentially reuse the same MAC addresses and just differentiate them if you had a single, as long as they're not on the same port.
Sure, but I don't think that introduces or changes the problem in any way for us because that capability impacts the existing ONOS in the same way. I don't think that changes anything, right?
I think you. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think you may be right. It may not. It may not matter if you depend on if the application depends on the MAC addresses being unique and MAC and VLAN pairs being unique anyway. Maybe it doesn't really matter. But I was just sort of thinking in general about, there in principle, there's no reason I couldn't build an L2 routing application on ONOS that worked, allowing all the MAC addresses to be the same, and just routing on, just virtualizing them or not using VLANs, using something else, or even using like IP domains or using MPLS or using anything else you can imagine.
Hey, it was, okay. I just want to return back to this sort of topic of representation within ONOS. So if we're looking at the host interface, I'm going to just talk about the interfaces now. We already have an attribute on there called MAC and an attribute called VLAN, which are actually drawn from the underlying ID. So the ID itself has the MAC and VLAN, and the host itself has the MAC and VLAN, which then draws it from the underlying ID with which it's associated. So I guess either solution we take, they will share in common the fact that we should update the host. So the host, we could have the existing VLAN and maybe an inner VLAN. To capture the inner one. And then we could decide whether or not we want to change the ID itself as well.
So I completely agree. So I think the easiest, least disruptive solution would be just add an inner VLAN field to the host object, populate it, and then use it when needed. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you could consider doing is we could change the notion of host ID, where instead of host ID being a MAC address and VLAN ID, we could say that a host ID is actually defined by one or more packet headers. And to construct a host ID, you provide one or more packet headers. We store that in some canonical representation. And then we provide convenience methods for extracting things like the MAC address, the VLAN, if they're present. In most cases, the portion of the header fields that you've provided, like I don't know how exactly you'd represent it, but you provide like a filtered view and a packet or something, and then we just it could just be as simple as like the equivalent of a bit mask in a packet. We figure out all the parts that you've activated, and then you could basically just compare a packet and compare like the mask that's provided. That's generally probably going to be used globally in the system, but could be used locally, and then use that to identify. So you could say that for my purposes, a host is as easy as an IP address. You could say that a host is a MAC address and an IP address. A host is a MAC, a VLAN, and an inner VLAN. So you kind of have to, I don't know, you kind of have to define your schema. Maybe it's a global schema for what you consider to be a host in your specific network, which would give people more flexibility in the future to change the way they identify hosts.
Yeah, okay. So I wonder if he could start with just by the simpler approach, and then if that hits some issues, basically simpler approach meaning just modifying the host representation.
Yeah.
And leaving the key as is. And then if you run into issues with that, then
sure.
That work that we've done won't be wasted because it will have to be done anyway.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about maybe more generalizing the host ID representation. Because by default, the minimum existing one is basically MAC VLAN, and the VLAN being able to be none, right? And I think that probably, I don't think we can't deviate from that as the minimal representation. It's not without breaking a whole bunch of other conventions. It's my only concern about the more kind of like even allowing it to be broader, like representing a host just as an IP.
Yeah, I guess my concern here is that I think you could probably make a lot of different arguments in the future about how you want to add more to this key. And if it's protocol centric, then you just get kind of a bloated key. In the spirit of kind of like protocol independence, maybe having some protocol agnostic representation that you need to register for a given, like you register with the host service at the time the host service is spun up, and you can kind of configure what you care about. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit more complicated, but maybe there's some value in doing that, because then if you're like operating in a non-Ethernet network, maybe it's an RDMA fabric or something where you have other host identifiers, then people can participate as these entities in your network without necessarily having to have a MAC address.
Actually, that's a good point. Like, obviously if it's, P4, it's not necessarily Ethernet or something. That's another thing to think about.
Right.
I mean, as a short-term make progress situation, if there's a belief with strong confidence that the inner VLAN is not necessary for uniqueness, then maybe just add it as a field to the host object. That'd be a pretty easy fix. And then going forward in the future, maybe we try to come back and figure out if there's a way to redefine what is the definition of a host. And maybe there's a way to be more flexible in how that's defined, and eventually maybe we could migrate to that.
So the inner VLAN would be a field in the values.
In default host, in the value.
Of the default host. I think the other field we'll need is the tag protocol ID of the outer VLAN field, because it can be two, right? It could be 8100, could be 888.
Yeah, so you know what to slap back on, right?
Right.
What's the downside with annotations? They're inefficient in terms of storage.
That's you have to kind of.
And you have to have a sort of like a runtime knowledge of how they're being.
I would prefer to cook it in.
Yeah, it's also access. It's string-based map, and it's
Yeah, it needs to be serialized to a string, parsed. Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, it's a nice guess, kind of escape hatch for various kind of ad hoc type stuff. But for this, I would suggest we just go with the regular fields. Okay. So basically, maybe adding. But do we need to have the question is, do we also need to have an identifier for the protocol for the outer tag?
Say that again?
So you said
the outer tag is probably just VLAN, right?
No, the inner tag is VLAN.
The inner is VLAN. The out, you need the
outer could be 888 or 8100.
Okay.
So basically, we need to keep track of the outer tag and the inner VLAN.
And the inner VLAN, yeah.
Yes. Should we track both inner? So, is there any merit in tracking also both protocol types?
Both protocol IDs?
Both protocol IDs.
I doubt it.
Got it. Okay. So we'll just introduce
I don't know of any. I don't know of anyone who has used inner VLANs to be anything other than 8100. It's only the outer VLAN. So when Cisco first put in the outer VLAN, they used their own tag protocol ID. They called it 9100. Then the standard was created, which made it 888.
Okay.
So you'll find cases where people just use the same one, 8100. There's actually three values in use today for the tag protocol ID of the outer VLAN.
In this case, it would be fairly straightforward to add it to those fields.
Yeah.
Just to add the builder.
Yeah.
Because we already have a builder pattern, so it won't change any backwards compatibility for the existing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you could also update the value of VLAN ID in default host to be the label stack, where label stack is a list of tag VLAN, tag VLAN.
how do you need an object?
Yeah, you need an object. Yeah, but then, I mean, the regular VLAN would just be regular VLAN tag, and the VLAN ID.
So there would be symmetry. Basically, you could just walk the whole stack.
You could just you could just put the stack in if you want.
I thought you just said we don't want to change the key.
No, this
No,
wouldn't be
this
the
is
key.
in the
This is in the object.
Oh,
The field
yeah.
in the object.
Yeah,
we
this
have just a single VLAN ID that's stored in there. But you could put the label stack, which is the
Inside of the ID itself.
ETH ID, yeah. Instead of, yeah.
No. In addition to. So
In addition
currently we
to-
have Mac, we would have a VLAN.
No, I mean
Would
inside
represent
VLAN.
the outer VLAN and would remain the same, and then just add a new field that would basically would be like a stack.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if once you implement the stack,
Uh-huh.
you could deprecate the VLAN ID field. Because the VLAN, you could still say, like, VLAN ID, the method, for purposes of backwards compatibility, could just take the first label
Understood. Yeah.
and return the ID
Well,
from
the first meaning the inner.
whichever.
Well, currently it already
It's the
goes.
it's the outer.
The thing is, currently
First
the
it's the
VLAN
outer.
and Mac.
Well-
if you look at the implementation of this, they already draw on the ID. They don't store anything in addition to their own. They go to the ID.
For default host,
But pretty sure.
it has its own field. It doesn't have a reference to host ID. That would be part of the abstract element, I think.
What?
The element ID is the ID.
No, it has host ID, the default host.
Yeah, that's the element ID, but then it also extracts the MAC address and VLAN ID out of it and stores it as a field in default host.
So I'm not remembering correctly how it was done, or it may have changed. Okay. Yeah, you're right. It has its own.
I mean, technically, we probably could drop those too. The getters could just be referenced to the element ID. Like this one could just be ID dot. Needs to be casted probably.
Yeah, the host ID needs to be casted if you want to do
that's
it.
host ID.
ID. Could do that.
So the minimal solution would be just to add, and kind of the most limited one would be to add the inner VLAN outer protocol type. But that would be kind of very specific to minimal. I kind of like the more general approach. You can just have a protocol stack.
But so what would be the VLAN ID and the host ID? Did I miss this?
It's still the outer. The outer.
It's still
the
always
outer.
the outer.
Yeah,
So
the outer.
the outer. But then you could basically walk the stack and then we see what the protocol type and the VLAN ID itself was.
But
ID.
when we parse the Ethernet packet we have two tags. The outer VLAN is stored in the Q-in-Q VLAN ID fields, and the inner one is stored in the VLAN ID field.
That's why I was suggesting.
Yeah.
the
Oh, so it's like a little bit inconsistent.
That's a parsing method.
In a parser, yeah. When you parse a packet, right, or deserialize a packet, and the outer is stored in the Q&Q, the inner is stored in VLAN.
I understand, but I was kind of decoupling mentally what's in the packet versus more of a mental model, right?
It honestly, as
It's
long
just a
as
naming thing.
you put whatever you want to do, as long as the combination of MAC address and VLAN is unique in the ONOS network.
The trick is not that it is unique, that it is reproducible, because you want to get that host through that ID. So you need to know what it's in. What you need to know and have like some way of knowledge of what is that. Is it the outer or is it the inner? So we need to document it in these stuff.
Yeah, so I'm just for simplicity, I'm kind of actually no wonder leaning for maintaining two optionals. If they're not present, that means we're dealing with a single type host. If they're present, we're dealing with two type hosts. And the optionals would be the outer protocol and the inner VLAN. Inner tag.
What worries me is now, does everywhere in all our apps where we check for a host, now we have to check whether there is a double tag or not?
Only when you want to treat it traffic, right?
Only when your app cares about it.
Cares about it?
Yeah.
Because for differentiating the host, we're already assuming, making an assumption that this existing IP is good enough. It's only when you actually want to decide what you want to do with the traffic, and that's why we need to carry the information about the outer protocol in inner tag.
Yes.
So that we can slop it on in proper order.
So basically, we're assuming that the VLAN ID we put in the host ID is the outermost VLAN, right? If you have one tag, then that's the tag. If you have two tags, then inner one will be stored in the
But what about
value. And if your app cares about it, you should look at the inner value.
But what about if at some point your app only knows about the inner VLAN, meaning not the Q&Q, for example? There's no way it can get a host that was tagged Q&Q because you store the outer VLAN in there.
Well, we can just extend the API to search the value. It's technically
You
possible.
already do.
Less
You already have the API. You can specify get me host by MAC, and you're gonna get a set of hosts by that MAC. You're gonna get across all the VLANs.
Sure. So it's just adding one more API saying that, okay, now I want to look up this MAC, but this inner VLAN. Now your implementation need to iterate the value.
Makes sense.
Less efficient, but still possible.
Sure.
Yeah, for me was to just make sure we resolve the getting the host uniquely by the host ID.
Mm-hmm.
If you can preserve that, then that's good enough.
So no one is worried about the confusion between how the parser sees things and how the host store will see it.
Because
It's an arbitrary ID, right?
But as of right now, everybody treated it as it was the inner VLAN. Like as of right now, it's the inner VLAN, right?
Only VLAN.
Only
VLAN.
it's
Right.
only
VLAN.
Yeah, but it is the inner VLAN. That was
but
no.
If it's the only VLAN, how do you say inner or outer? I could say it's outer.
Right. Ambiguous.
Well, but in the packet, it's the inner one.
That's in the deserializer. And that's just the
okay.
name, right? I mean,
So if you decide, okay, so the host comes in from the edge of the network, and
Yeah.
you decide to identify it using the outer tag. That outer tag gets stripped, and now later on you're seeing throughout the network, let's say the traffic with the inner VLAN only, and then you're trying to find the host by the inner VLAN. Is that what you're worried about?
Yes.
Okay, in that particular case, then to be able to find the host
You need
uniquely, you need to be able to consult one of the query methods
Yeah.
or one of the additional methods that we add. I think the existing methods would frankly suffice,
But
then you have to find the one that you want because there's an ambiguity there, right?
Yeah, but would it break the existing apps if we have an app that pushes a host with the double tagged host and stores the host ID with the outer VLAN, and then some existing app that we don't want to change checks out for it?
But I think that the question is broader than that. It's already breaking things as it is. So because you may potentially then have, after stripping the tag and now you're putting basically traffic that looks the same on the network potentially from two different endpoints, right? If you were to strip just the outer tag, then you already have ambiguity through the network, right? So
it's here. It's 8888.
Right.
Right.
yeah. Q&Q.
and you don't have any
Yeah.
basis
Okay.
now for
8100.
differentiating which one is which.
This is the
Yeah,
outer.
I agree.
Outer, inner.
Okay, so we have a solution. So let's try.
Sometimes people use 8100.
Who's gonna attack it?
John,
Charles? Okay. All right.
it was clear. right?
Congratulations.
For me, it's still ambiguous because the host has discovered that the host location provider, when it creates the host ID, it gets the VLAN ID from the deserialized Ethernet packet, and it is the inner VLAN ID.
Yeah, it does
Yeah.
.VLAN, and which will give you the inner one.
If there's just a single VLAN ID, that's fine, but double VLAN tag, inner one, too.
So that needs to change, right? That
Yeah.
code needs to change and
Yeah.
check if there is a double VLAN,
Right,
and then
exactly.
take the Q&Q VLAN from the parser and use
they
that to
reject-
create the host ID.
That should take the priority, right?
But that's in kind of behavior change, right? Because people now kind of assume that host location provider will fill the host store with the inner VLAN. Now we fill the host store without a VLAN.
The question is how many people are actually using.
That's
Well,
would
that's
be
always the same question. Like when you're going to have an API change, right?
That was my question
I'm
about breaking
not the
applications.
authority on this one.
No, the question is who. If we make this change, how many people are going to complain? Actually, it should at least be announced, right?
We can certainly announce it. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. If we don't hear back, then just go ahead and do it.
Why don't we leave it as is?
Well, then it's
That'd
not
be fun.
unique. It's not unique.
Big,
So,
as you
so
were
the whole
saying.
point of the ID is that it's a reasonably opaque entity and it's reasonably decoupled from what's on the wire. It's by convention that we were using the one and only tag, which happened to, because if there's only one, it comes from the VLAN ID. But if there's one, well, we sort of are augmenting the convention that if it's a dually tagged packet, then we're gonna take it from the Q and Q and give that a priority. But we also are going to store, with the resulting object, we're going to store the inner VLAN and the outer protocol type. So we can summarize the general approach on which we've agreed on and sort of broadcast it out there. This is what we're thinking, and give everybody a chance to comment. But I would probably just proceed, because this is something that's time sensitive, I understand, right?
Yeah,
I would proceed with the implementation, at least start submitting the patch, and then I can write up the email. I'll run it by you, Charles, and sort of just to make sure that I didn't botch the wording. Sounds good?
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.
Is this
Bye-bye.
target for master?
Sorry?
Is this target for master?
This should be right.
Okay. Kind of quite a big change. I don't want to do it in 112.
Thanks.